My name is Geoff Whaling. I'm the chairman of the National Hemp Association and the chair and president of HEMI, Hemp Education Marketing Initiatives.
Excellent. So, Geoff, right before we went on camera, you were drawing your connections in here and giving a little bit of your background. Kind of lead right in and give us your background and connection into this business and how you got into this.
Well, I love the world of politics. Worked with a number of Canadian politicians. Two of them were the Prime Ministers of Canada. Joe Clark was the Prime Minister in 1979 and 80, and he was looking to give a speech on the importance of looking at the decriminalization of marijuana because of the lifetime effects that it would have on an individual. And in order to prepare that speech, I did some research and certainly got research out of the United States that kind of introduced to me the difference between marijuana and hemp. Flash forward through the world of motorsports and my longstanding relationship with actor Paul Newman, who owned the Newman Haas race team. Certainly, I learned an awful lot about farming and Newman's own products that he was bringing to the marketplace, his focus on trying to bring good products to the marketplace for the benefit of his children's charities, the Newman's Own Foundation. And certainly when he died and I was rethinking where I go next, it was no shock that when I saw the interview of Paige Figge on Sanjay Gupta, it was as if Paul Newman had picked up a phone and called me and told me to get off my ass and go and help those people. And the rest is kind of history. In between all of that, as many people know, I joined some colleagues of mine from Canada who started a company called Tweed. I joined them as we grew the company to become Canopy Growth Corporation. And Canopy became the largest marijuana and hemp company on the planet. So I know both sides of the industry, and I've certainly also tried to stand up the financing of the industry by creating, with Bruce, my former partner at Canopy, a special purpose acquisition company. We were offered up to $242 million in about 7 hours on Zoom during COVID. And then we realized that we couldn't invest that money as we were required under that SPAC agreement in the hemp industry because there were no hemp businesses that met the requirements. And as some of your viewers might realize, it was in 2018 that Canopy Growth received a huge infusion of cash from a company called Constellation Brands, ironically, a beverage company, and they kept coming back with more and more money. And I was one of those who sat around our executive tables at Canopy and said, let's just take it. I had no clue why a beverage company was interested in Canopy. But at the end of the day, they too, their actuarial studies were showing them that liquor consumption was dwindling. And they saw cannabis, both THC and CBD, as being the next wave of intoxicants. And ironically, here we are today with the industry looking at ways to survive through the new definition.
With the program with the Goodness of Hemp Act? Is that something that's fun? How is that funded? And then who's funding that drive? Is it tied to those businesses that you already mentioned as well?
No, not at all.
Okay.
It is industry driven. The reality is that now late last September, I was invited to the White House, and some of my colleagues from the fiber and grain sector attended with me.
You were there with Steve Groff. Yeah, one of my former clients there. Yeah, he's their regenerative agriculture farmer. Yeah.
Yeah, Steve was not at the White House. Steve actually, I think, went to Mar-a-Lago.
That's right. I'm sorry. He was in Mar-a-Lago. Yeah.
And came to me with some pointers since I've been there a few times myself. But the White House approached and asked if we would have a meeting. At that point, the National Hemp Association had decided to remove itself from the discussion on cannabinoids about a year and a half earlier. It was a little bit of a wake up for us in our meeting with the White House senior leadership, who said that they wanted to talk to us. In fact, I started the conversation saying, wow, quite an illustrious audience to discuss industrial hemp. And Heidi Overton, whose name is known to our industry, the president's advisor on health, said, well, actually, we're not here to talk to you about industrial hemp. We're here to talk to you about cannabinoids. And I've known Heidi since the first Trump administration and her work at Johns Hopkins. So I said, well, tough luck for you, because I don't give a rat's ass about cannabinoids anymore. The National Hemp Association has stepped away from it because it's taken away from the true and largest opportunity for hemp and what we originally started this mission on, and that is the agricultural commodity fiber grain. And the response was, that's great, fiber and grain is going to be safe. We need someone with your experience to kind of look at this from a 30,000-foot perspective, and we need a strategy. The strategy that we're getting from others, which was just regulate us, is not a strategy. We need someone to do so. So Morgan Tweet, the CEO of IND Hemp, was with me in those meetings, and she said, let's get to work. So we went to a congressional office. We started to do a whiteboard session and look at that so that we could respond to the White House. And then we decided to reach out to all of the other hemp organizations and say, participate with us. We drafted that strategy and finished it in about a month and a half. It's called Pushing Progress. And it kind of looks at the hemp industry to be no different than corn or wheat and the other agricultural commodities that have many uses. And we just aligned ourselves to the same sort of pathway that they had and said, this is what we need as this long-term strategy, comprehensive strategy to stand up this industry. The natural progression of from Pushing Progress is legislation. And so we decided that we internally, with all those participants, would draft our own legislation, knowing that NHA is considered one of the most trusted voices on the Hill. Certainly we pay attention to what people are saying to us. Our seat at the table in the 2014, 18, and now 2026 Farm Bill, and my personal longstanding relationship with Mitch McConnell, who I worked with since 2013, trying to, really bring this agricultural commodity to a reality, as we did in Canada following Joe Clark's speech. We've had a vibrant grain industry in Canada now coming on almost 40 years. It certainly is, it sells about $700 million worth of products into the United States annually. And despite the fact I'm a Canadian at heart, my citizenship is now American, and I don't give a rat's ass about my Canadian colleagues anymore. Those opportunities should be here for American farmers.
I agree with you. I want to talk a little bit about this because in actuality, I wrote a piece last week about putting some hedging, some probabilities on different acts and different things that are going on. And this is obviously, I pushed that out prior to us even booking. So now with you in the mix, and I saw you guys did a really nice, I don't know if it was organic or not, but you were on every media outlet in the past week with as far as the announcement of the act. Who are your sponsors, co-sponsors, or how is that going to kind of help me? Let me step back. Help everybody, the viewers in the audience, understand. For those that have followed that, read that article on our newsletter last week, I didn't really have you guys in there as much because it wasn't really there. So let's update that and let's let people know where you are, what's the progress behind, or as much as you can share behind the scenes as far as how that fits into the other 8 bills that are already out.
Yeah, so there are a number of ways that legislation is brought to passage and to the president's desk for signing. Some is instigated by a member of Congress on either the House or the Senate side who has a constituent that has an issue that resonates with that particular member. They try to find like-minded people, and then together they draft legislation. It is, It is always a goal to have what is referred to in the legislative pathway four corners legislation, which is bipartisan and bicameral support. So that is the path that most people follow. Most people believe that legislation is only generated from congressional members, but that's not the case. Industry advocates participate in the drafting of legislation. And certainly, we have, as your viewers have observed over the last year, there have been pieces of legislation that congressional members have introduced, and they've tried to introduce, they've tried to, offset what's coming up with the McConnell language that is to be implemented on November the 13th. And all of those have failed. And they failed for a number of reasons, lack of support, lack of education, and lack of understanding of the hemp industry. We have many supporters on the Hill for hemp, but they're becoming very frustrated by this process themselves. And it's only because there are so many special interest groups. When I first started this 14 years ago, I think there were 2 organizations in the hemp space, maybe 3. Now,
I was blown away coming from alcohol. I was blown away at how many there were. Like I was like, it's overwhelming from any aspect, let alone being a lawmaker having the door swing open all day long.
well, and that's what's happened. And I hear from staff, I've heard from members, I hear from the White House who said to me, like, who are these people? And how come everybody says they represent hemp farmers? Who are these farmers? How many farmers are there? And of course, it's a ploy by people, whether it be, big alcohol, whether it is some of the so-called bad actors, people that are in the lab space that are looking for approval of their special interests that have created these groups. And, they might think that members of Congress are dumb, but, certainly case in point, the Comer extension language that has been drafted and floating around recently, within probably 5 minutes of it being released and made available for discussion, I had people calling me saying, do you know that one of the other hemp groups wrote this legislation? And I said, don't be surprised by that. That happens. But, for people to try and suggest that if you don't have a sponsor, if you don't, and you push legislation forward, that is not going to go anywhere. Case in point with the Goodness of Hemp Act. We as an industry who have invested years in this space and have listened intently and to the concerns of members of Congress, have framed the Goodness of Hemp Act in such a way that it recognizes the limitations on hemp for intoxicating products. And it gives pathways to stand up an industry. And the unfortunate thing is that there is no committee on the House or Senate side that stands up new industries. And the reality is that the bill that the industry has drafted, called the Goodness of Hemp Act, it tries to address the entire hemp supply chain. Very much like the corn industry. The difference is that we're trying to do this in one piece of legislation because we don't have the benefits of 50 years, 100 years of legality. And just case in point, most people know that corn, like hemp, is food and feed, but corn quickly became moonshine. And our moonshine just happens to be the gas station wheat products that are out there. And when the corn industry realized that this was a huge business opportunity, they went to Congress searching out a pathway to move this forward. And they've done so with every single segment of the economy that corn can participate in, whether it be textiles or fuels or sweeteners or food itself. The industry has gone to FDA and to the regulating authorities and asked them for guidance as to how to stand this up, and then have gone back to Congress and said, okay, this is what we need. Goodness of Hemp is trying to do this all under one bill. And we know that has little chance of moving forward on its own because there isn't a pathway for a bill that touches on 6 different committees in the House, let alone maybe 4 or 5 in the Senate. But what we've done as an industry is kind of put our messaging forward that A, we've listened to Congress, B, we've listened to the White House, and C, our industry needs this help today. So we've written this legislation, as a committee, as a group, and we've had the seed people in the grain industry, the fiber industry, the beverage industry, the CBD industry, all contribute to this language, and then we've made sure that we've tied it all together. So that we at least are acknowledged as understanding how this is going to work and how it has to work. We've drafted this legislation, but we've also, I think, wisely shared it with Congressman Barr, and certainly with Congressman Griffith, and now with Senator Sheehy's office, and saying, take what you want from this legislation, but this is what the industry is looking at. Sheehy was really focused on trying to advance beverages, but didn't really understand that Montana, his state, also has I&D hemp there, one of the largest, if not the largest, producers of fiber and grain hemp in North America. And when his staff kind of figured that out, they're like, oh, well, how do we deal with this as well? And so they have been very supportive, and we expect that it could be as early as today that we might see a revised Barr bill with some support from the Democrats. And we have really worked hard to gain that bipartisan support for the Barr bill. But at the end of the day, the appetite for this legislation, the Barr bill, the Griffith bill, the Sheehy bill, is no different than it is for the Goodness of Hemp. They might have sponsors, they might have people that are moving it forward, but the overall appetite is very limited. And it might, we're slowly working, running out of runway to get anything moved. Just yesterday, the Speaker of the House, Speaker Johnson, confirmed that the continuing resolution language that was introduced last Friday is going to be a clean continuing resolution. There will be no special interest.
Yeah, I saw no poison pills or anything like that inside,
Right.
So with what you did with the Goodness of Hemp, I read through the entire thing when you sent it to me. Thank you for sending that. It is by far, and that's why I wanted to bring up the article and not mentioning anything, because it is the most comprehensive legislation I've seen. It is fantastic. It is, in my personal opinion, the best platform moving forward for this. Also, at the same time, the duality is, I agree, the runway's not there. I mean, so how does the Goodness of Hemp move forward, or does it move forward in facets between these other bills? Does it just enhance the other bills, and then you know what I mean? Like, kind of help the audience understand how it kind of moves forward in this timetable that we currently have up until November. Obviously, if you're working with Barr and all the other stuff too.
So the reality is that people who are moving the Barr bill forward, the Griffith bill forward, the Sheehy bill forward, they like it because it serves their interest.
Right.
And the reality is that we need to just let those things play themselves out. We have not seen the updated versions of Barr or Sheehy. We're looking forward to seeing those as soon as this week, and we can comment further on them. But we, based on what we solidly know from Congress, is that they are not interested in intoxicating beverages that have no caps on them. They're not interested in products that are not highly regulated and available to children. They would like to see hemp beverages move forward because there's a huge industry that has started, but not at where the industry wants. They want to start slow. And again, to my colleagues in the industry, I encourage them to look at the Goodness of Hemp bill as a starting point, not as a finishing point. I don't know, well, I do know actually, after Prohibition, beer was low dose. Did not fit the definition of alcohol. and it was approved, and it was a beverage solution that allowed people to participate until such time as regulations were in place and the alcohol industry could stand on its feet again. We have used a lot of those examples in thinking about the goodness of hemp and how it moves forward. So we will be happy if Senator Sheehy's bill, Congressman Barr Griffith's bill includes elements of the goodness of hemp. But, in typical Geoff Whaling fashion, I am hopeful that everyone will see the light and say, you know what, this is the Goodness of Hemp bill is the most comprehensive, it's realistic, and it deals with all the challenges that both the industry has, but also, members of Congress have. Most members of Congress do not recognize hemp as being a fiber or grain. They only know it to be an intoxicant. And that has worked against us. We hosted a reception with members of the GOP a few weeks ago under the Goodness of Hemp, and I was really surprised at the lack of knowledge about what hemp is, and that they only thought it was something that you could get high on.
Yeah, it opened my eyes actually with Steve Groff. I live about an hour away from Steve, and obviously in Lancaster. And I think it was 2018 or 2019 or so. I went down to his farm and stuff like that, and touching the plants, walking the plants. I had experienced, being a marijuana participant for my life and stuff like that in a recreational way, but it wasn't until I spent time with Steve where that's when the correlation came, or the connection came through, when I saw all the different facets of what it could mean. And it was, and even then, beverages wasn't even on the radar. It wasn't even in my mind. I was just going with what Steve was producing and what Steve was growing over there. And then to learn the regenerative agriculture aspect of things. And I'm so happy that you finally brought up the corn, because I think the number one thing that everybody wants to act like we're on an island and this is such a shock and all these other things. It's the exact same pathway as corn to moonshine to prohibition, and then reverse. History is cyclical, and we're in the exact same cycle here. From the media aspect of things, we're going to be putting this out here, and I'm glad that, because sometimes when the articles read through like it was going to be a ninth bill that was going to compete with the others. But just so I understand, the audience understands, this was an intention of education, as well as the framework that all these other bills were. The intention was for them to grab what fits for them to more comprehensively enhance their framework to build the industry as a whole, as opposed to the end consumer product with the focus in mind.
Absolutely. And that is from my years of experience, both in Canadian politics and here in the United States. That's how things happen. They move slowly. But, I think we need to elevate. That is why the Goodness of Hemp Act has been introduced, and our campaign is under the Hemp Education Marketing Initiative, because we believe that right now, at this point in time, we need to continue to educate and market hemp as an agricultural commodity like corn that has all of these other opportunities. The challenge, first and foremost, is that hemp is part of the cannabis plant, and that is the barrier for most members. I jokingly tell people that, when some of the major media call me and say, well, Geoff, what's it going to take for your vision to become a reality? And I'm like, well, I just need 10 members of the U.S. Senate to retire. And that is only because that messaging that was associated with cannabis, it was an excellent marketing campaign, even though from the 1930s, it was, save our children from hemp and marijuana. That has stuck with people, and particularly with members of the Senate who are, 75 plus years old. They have lived through and have legislated during the, say no to drug era. And so to turn them around, although people like Chuck Grassley are really supportive of the hemp industry, but certainly well educated on, the potential of the shenanigans that could go on. I remember in the 2018 Farm Bill, he and I talking about reducing or eliminating his language that was saying, anybody that's got a drug conviction can't be involved in the hemp industry. And that conversation led into him saying, Geoff, are you sure this isn't going to be, opening the door, a gateway to drugs? And I'm like, nah, it's a gateway to prosperity. I had no clue. And I'd like to think that he did have a clue, but I think we all had no clue that we would be where we are today when we were moving the 2018 Farm Bill to the president's desk.
I don't think at the time that it moved through, I don't think so. But I think at the time from the service side of the industry, when I started out in 2018, servicing this industry alongside the alcohol industry, I was doing, it was basically service anything that was in the liquor store. So I had beef jerky, pickles, spirits, beer, blah, blah, blah. And as soon as the Farm Bill passed, it was the emails and the phone calls started coming in for, hey, you want to sell the gummies, the flat? And then that was, for me, the biggest wake up call to saying, shit, this is going to go off the rails. And literally it was when I started getting price books and all kinds of things. And then that was when I wanted to get involved because I know, just like how these infrastructures can work. I also, being in the alcohol industry, we have bathtub dinners, we have guys that run state lines and try to cowboy stuff over and break the law. I'm used to that chaos and understanding and working in the wholesale side of things, especially that being federally licensed as a wholesaler and being running that type of stuff. You have to wake up every day and understand that everything's different and everything's got some outside external factors. But when you speak about where it can go, what do you think? I mean, I don't want to say any odds or anything like that, but I don't want to talk about odds at all. So I want to be clear about that. What do you think ends up happening in this position right now? Do you think it ends up that we go to an extension of the ban to then work this system out and build that framework over the next 2 years? Or do you think something does get put together in the next 2-3 months and kind of repivot this? I'm fine with either way. I just want to kind of get your opinion, just because I'm getting a lot of, in this position that I'm in, you get a lot of opinions. You know what I mean? And then I'm also physically, I go past the opinions, and I also have sat in those congressional offices over the past few months, as well as my own state capital. So I go to the source as much as possible, but I feel like you feel like a very level-headed, middle of the road type thing. And I'd like to have that kind of a conversation of what's the real reality, so that our audience, who is founders and farmers and different things like that, can begin to take action and prepare themselves for either path,
Well, Nate, thank you for that question. The reality is that, there has been very little debate or discussion about true industrial hemp fiber and grain.
Yeah.
But under the current new definition that will be implemented come November the 13th, industrial hemp fiber and grain is safe, is fine, and will move forward. Now, Geoff Whaling saying so doesn't make it an open industry, because we still have the issues that are, really kind of preventing the industry from growing, access to capital, banking, and markets. Farmers and most business people are looking for clarity, and there is no clarity, and so most people will shy away from hemp just because it is too difficult. The other side of that coin is that since the 2018 Farm Bill, and I credit this comment given to me to the Congressional Research Service, who in one of their reports requested by a member of Congress on the hemp industry around the globe, they gave NHA credit for assisting some 50 plus countries around the world in advancing their pilot programs, their research programs, their legislation, their regulations, and to the point of standing up the industry. I think that if we don't get our act together in the United States soon, the rest of the world will have an industry based on American know-how and knowledge, because there's a number of people in our space that are now traveling the world and educating. And they're doing so without any government support or funding. And the funding that is available to the marketplace to help promote markets and others is only being used principally to promote CBD and in some cases intoxicating products, which is a violation of USDA rules and federal law. But we need to continue to move forward, providing opportunities for American farmers. That was my original intent. I did join forces with Paige Figge. She and I created the Coalition for Access Now to help those families who were looking for access to CBD. But I don't know that even the Stanley brothers, who were in both the marijuana business and the cannabinoid business, believed that we were going to be where we are today. They don't have the ability to move anything forward.
From your perspective, and I'm gonna take the heat on this one and just to lead it in, and you can take it wherever you want. But 22 years in the alcohol industry, I personally, from a business standpoint and as 18-year business owner, do not understand why the alcohol industry has not accepted the declining alcohol sales and become the biggest champion for this, and then thus the supply chain, just like we've done with hops and malts and barley. And in the craft beer industry, people forget home brewing used to be illegal. You know what I mean? You used to have to buy all the different pieces of the kit, but you couldn't sell the kit together.
Right.
There's different nuances that existed. I don't understand, and maybe you can enlighten me as to why we didn't see major brewers and distillers and things like that embracing this as an incremental portfolio item, thus then supporting and defending its regulation, as opposed to how it turned into what it looks like today.
Well, and I think that there were spurts and start on this. Certainly Constellation Brand was interested in it. They wouldn't have made a $4.5 billion investment into Canopy Growth otherwise. I think that there were companies here in the United States that believed that this was an opportunity. But the overall issue is that, again, clarity. The alcohol industry, there are enough people in it that don't want any additional competition. There are some within the alcohol industry that welcome, like the retailers would welcome an opportunity to have more product on the shelves. The other thing that most people miss in this is that the U.S. taxpayer and the U.S. Treasury has lost billions of dollars in excise tax because of the downturn in alcohol consumption. There's no way to stand that up because alcohol is not going to come full circle. Hemp could be, and hemp beverages could be that source of income. And what I like about that opportunity is that the industry would accept that, the Johns Hopkins report, which most people are referring to, is an indication that intoxication, begins for some adults at 3 milligrams in a container. That is the starting point. It's not the ending point, but that's the starting point for legislation. And when you can point to research and say, this is what is acceptable, and this is the line, it's like the 0.3% THC that defines hemp from marijuana. No one really knows where that came from. I know it came from a Canadian and it was an arbitrary number. But again, it was based on that is where, 0.3% is when people started to become intoxicated from marijuana. So that is the reality. And I'm now getting a checkup call with a media group wanting to know what's the latest and greatest today. But the beverage industry, it's like turning the Queen Mary around and trying to get them to accept something new. Again, they're looking for clarity. And the reason why they, don't seem to be obviously involved in this space is that they don't know anything beyond beverages. That's their expertise. And they don't look at hemp as being, all of its potential component parts. And they don't want to support the Goodness of Hemp bill because they only know the beverage component of it. They don't want to get into the cannabinoid gummies and other intoxicating products and non-intoxicating products, the CMS program. They don't want to get involved in fiber and grain. And so that's why it seems like they're sitting on the sidelines. But there are a number of the hemp beverage companies that are getting their associations or putting together associations. You've seen many of them come to reality.
There's a long laundry list of those.
Well, there is a long laundry.
I don't mean to devalue. I'm going to be clear. I'm not devaluing anything. I just mean that when it comes to the time of panic and the time of bracing things, it's a challenge to have multiple directives and multiple perspectives. So that's my point. I'm not devaluing anyone's work, other than at this point, at this time in the football field, we're in the red zone, and a unifying voice is the most important voice right now.
Well, and one that deals with reality. I mean,
that's even better to say it that way. Thank you. Yeah.
I know
you
that
see the tone in my voice changes because I'm very passionate about this, because unlike everything else, I've been down this road, and where I get frustrated, I want to interrupt you 1 second. When I get frustrated is exactly what you just said about beverage, as well as other people only focusing on what affects them. And something that I'll credit my history in the craft beer industry, I walked the farm fields of the grain and the malts, and I walked the hop fields. I touched the hops. I actually, from my history, learned and trained all of our sales team and took them to the fields. We went to hop fields. We went to met farmers. Like, we went to show the whole supply chain and have people tangibly experience it. And I think now you're exactly right. We're in this situation where it's confusing. There's a million different perspectives. And if you don't have a tangible, visceral experience to the supply chain, you have no understanding about what everybody's saying. And honestly, I part of me wishes that more people had spent that time doing their due diligence before starting their businesses, because you'd have not only an emotional attachment, but an actual experience that you can understand that it's more than just the droplet that goes in the can that runs down the conveyor belt and gets cleaned up. There's a whole world that happens prior to that.
Well, and I think, Nate, that's a good segue to, one of our biggest challenges is that in this process, people forget about farmers. And if we really were able to move legislation forward that allowed for naturally occurring American grown cannabinoids, we would have a flourishing agricultural, maybe specialty crop industry, greenhouse grow for cannabinoids, dual purpose crops and others. But we don't right now, because there is the ability to make all of these intoxicating products in a laboratory. And that is not what any of us, who sat around the table. And, I love to joke because I hear all of these people saying, well, when we were, the 2018 Farm Bill, and I'm like, I don't even know you. Like, I've never seen your face before. Like, what do you mean the 2018 Farm Bill? And I also put, some of the weight for where we are on my shoulders, because at the time of the 2018 Farm Bill, there appeared to be people who were far smarter than me that were really pushing for a definition of hemp that included isomers and salts and all of these other things. And certainly they were saying so for the cannabinoid market. And certainly because of my work with Paige and those families, I wanted to see that happen. My focus on the 2018 Farm Bill was trying to fill the gap that prevented American tribal councils and territories from participating in this space. And at that time, there was an incredible pushback from people who said, well, why do we want to give those people? And I'm like, what do you mean? They're Americans. And we should give
they've been farming it longer than we've been alive.
Well, and I think, that might be my Canadianism, because, the Indigenous communities in Canada are first and foremost in every piece of legislation that moves forward. But not so here. I've learned so much in this experience that, it is usually the loudest voices than the biggest wallets that, try to, interfere with the, traditional process. And have tried to get their special interest. And right now, we have groups that are investing hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to influence members of Congress, who themselves, I don't want to say that some of my colleagues in this industry are loaded with cash and not a lot of brains, but those members of Congress would gladly take their money because they're all, running for midterm elections and re-elections, and they all have. I understand the entire responsibility of congressional members. They spend a lot of time down the street from Congress raising money. So this is easy money for them, people in our industry. But I'm starting to see that there are cracks in that where, after last Friday's continuing resolution language was released and there was nothing in it from hemp, then I see email chains from the beverage industry saying, we're spending $25,000 a month or $50,000 a month on lobbyists, and we can't do that anymore. We just can't afford it because, this pathway seems to be getting narrower and narrower. And I don't want to say I told you so, but I reflected on something that I've been telling the industry since the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill about cannabinoids. If people go back and look at the 2014 and 2018 Farm Bill, you can quickly come to a conclusion, if you understand legislative language, that there was no pathway provided to legalize cannabinoids out of the box. They preserve the rights and authority of HHS and the FDA. And I've kept reminding people, but there have been louder voices than mine who said, no, this was legal. And I hold those people responsible for where we are today because they have sold their clients, again, people who want to invest in this space, a bill of goods. And now those people are not as vocal as they once were.
It's very telling as well. I'm very much an observer and patterns and everything like that. In the past couple of years, it's been very interesting watching those. I don't know if you see the memes online where like Simpson kind of backs into the bushes a little bit and tries to disappear. Homer Simpson, I feel like there's been a lot of that where they're backing into the crop field. And where I want to kind of leave this with in the last couple of minutes here is, I don't want anybody to take any of this as a doom and gloom. I think there is a realistic mission going here. And I know we talked about lobbying dollars possibly going down, people kind of expending out their budgets over the past couple of months and leading up to this. What is a path for anyone in this to, kind of how does somebody, I think it's a little late now to jump in, I wouldn't say, but what can somebody use? Let me rephrase this. If somebody's in this industry and has an audience as well as has a community, has consumers, how can they activate that and not writing checks necessarily, but how can they positively affect what's going on right now?
Well, and Nate, I think the commentary that you made about the Goodness of Hemp Act is an example of what can be done by the industry without money. These were people who are really standing up with a long-term vision of the goodness of hemp. And we've worked diligently. I've been a volunteer in this space for 14 years now. And I would encourage people to go to the Goodness of Hemp website, which is thegoodnessofhemp.org, and learn more about the work that we're doing, not only to pass legislation, but to educate members of Congress. And certainly if they have the ability to support the initiative, then fine. But, we don't allow your ability to pay to dictate whether or not you can, be a participant in this process. I deal with hundreds of people around the world who are trying to learn about how this could help their industry, their community, their country. And, we don't have a lot of special interest. We're saying, the most intoxicating products to be legal. Unless you do that, we're wrong. I remind people that the Goodness of Hemp is a starting point, not an ending point. Your history with the alcohol industry certainly will dictate to those that are interested in listening to you that, corn for bourbon and others didn't start out where we are today. And we're just following that pathway as we move forward. But, we are more than intoxicating beverages. We are more than intoxicating cannabinoids. Certainly, we are trying to move an entire industry forward and all of its segment parts. And we welcome people to come and join us for the ride.
Perfect. Well, I'm going to let you know my commitment to you is I will edit this afternoon and I will publish this episode tomorrow. That way, when it'll drop. I think it's very timely to have this up now. And if there's any changes in some of the things you talked about between now and then, I'll be paying attention as well, and I'll send you an email with some filler questions. That way, also to let you know, I'll be doing a feature article in the newsletter specifically just on the goodness of hemp as well. Because personally, after I published last week's and then you put this out, I was like, I have to give this the platform it needs, because I'm not kidding. I absolutely love this. I absolutely love the framework you have. I've dug into the website. I've watched the videos. Like, it is a fantastic framework and an educational platform for everybody to catch themselves up and figure out what's going on in the entire vertical aspect of what goes on in the industry. So I want to thank you so much for taking the time today. You have a lot of phone calls that are going to come in today and tomorrow and things like that. So I really appreciate you taking the time out this morning. As soon as these changes hit and marijuana movement and everybody else covers it, and I'm sure you're buzzing all over the place over in Westchester. Yeah.
Well, and in between, immediately following this, I'm supposed to be accompanying my wife on a medical trip, but I have a meeting with the USDA FAS officials in Pretoria, South Africa, who want us to, come to educate the 13 countries that they represent on the goodness of hemp. So, we are not going anywhere, whether or not legislation comes or goes, whether or not the implementation comes and goes. And certainly we're ready for that. We've got our own version of an extension with pretty big guardrails, again, representing what we know Congress has an appetite for. So we'll continue to move this, but come November the 13th, if there isn't legislation, you can be rest assured that the Goodness of Hemp Act is not going anywhere. We will bring it up in the next Congress, where I think we might even have a better chance of getting the full bill broken into its component pieces and taken through committee. So come along for the ride.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again. And I want to close out to remind everybody, this is the Ready to Drink podcast. We talk about ROIs, we talk about investments, we talk about brands, but at the end of the day, also, what is this? It's about human connection. So when you're walking down the street, put your phone in your pocket, look at the stranger as you're walking through, smile at them, nod at them, whatever. Don't be creepy. Just kind of feel the vibe and feel the body language. When you're at the gas station filling up your cup of coffee, ask the person next to you how they're doing, and actually shut your mouth and listen to what they have to say. All right. 5 minutes of kindness to a stranger every week is my challenge to the audience. All right. That's 20 minutes a month. There's a lot of things going on in this world. It's a beautifully destructive place. Your life might be full. You got the house, the wife, the kids, the husband, the dog, but that's not the case for everybody. So 20 minutes a month of kindness to a stranger, and let's start putting some positive impacts out there. So Geoff, thank you again so much for what you're doing. And I'm looking forward to a few more conversations with you as the excitement continues over the next few months.
And before I say goodbye, I would like to remind your listeners and viewers that it costs nothing to be kind.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Absolutely. Hey, you have a good rest of your day, buddy. Good luck today.